Oh, good, glad you're here. No, I want you to scroll up, not down. No, stop doing that mouse wheel. Is I have to buy a new mouse. Alright, let's pick something interesting.
At around 9 p.m. on the 28th of May, 1977, a fire began at the Beverly Hills Supper Club, a sprawling entertainment venue and nightclub just outside Cincinnati. Despite plenty of warning that a fire had started, many of the 3,000 guests within the building that evening were unable to evacuate in time. The blaze ultimately claimed 165 lives, making it the third deadliest in US history.
Mouse is still
The
giving me
Beverly
incredible
Hills Supper
trouble.
Club was constructed in 1937 and operated as a high-class venue offering dinner, drinks, and cabaret entertainment. Entertainers came from as far afield as Las Vegas, Nashville, and Hollywood to perform there, and the club was never short of clientele. So popular was it, in fact, that in the early 1970s it began to expand. Several extensions were cobbled onto the original structure, resulting in a sprawling and extensive entertainment complex with multiple stages, dining rooms, and event spaces. Though the building itself was made of material classified as non-combustible, it was lushly decorated with wooden panelling, thick carpets, and luxurious curtains. The historical building had no sprinkler system, nor any smoke detectors, and the ad hoc manner in which extensions had been added meant that some of the larger event spaces had no exits leading directly outside. On Saturday the 28th of May, 1977, the club was filled beyond capacity. John Davidson, a popular singer at the time, was performing in the cabaret room, and excited patrons had filled not only every seat, but the ramps and aisles as well. The room, which had a safety limit of 600 persons, may have held as many as 1,300 that night. Elsewhere, patrons were dining at the club's gourmet eateries or attending private gatherings in the building's many suites and event spaces. The total number of guests inside the entire complex was estimated to be around 3,000, twice the number that the club could safely accommodate. The fire began sometime before 9 p.m. in the Zebra Room, a small event space near the main entrance that was, at the time, hosting a wedding reception. The guests in the Zebra Room left early after complaining that the heating in the room was far too high, and that they could hear a lot of strange banging or popping noises. Little did these guests know that faulty wiring in the ceiling had started a small, smouldering fire. After the last guest left, this fire burned quietly away until 9 p.m, at which point an employee smelled smoke and opened the Zebra Room door to investigate. Two things happened simultaneously when that employee opened the Zebra Room door. One was that she confirmed the presence of a fire in the building.
Mouse wheel.
This led to the fire department being called and to several employees grabbing fire extinguishers and piling into the room to try and fight the flames.
We can't go
The
with
other
this.
thing that happened was that oxygen entered the room. Lots of it, enough to stoke what had been a smouldering fire up into a healthy, all-consuming blaze. Things moved quickly after that. At 9:01 p.m, the fire department received their first call and set out for the supper club. They arrived at 9:05 p.m, by which time smoke was pouring from the building. Staff inside had given up hope of being able to fight the fire, and were instead moving quickly through the complex in all directions, attempting to alert as many patrons as they could. The club, remember, had no alarm system, and so it was down to individual employees to order evacuations from every room, every corridor, every auditorium. It was 9:06 p.m.
What am I
when
doing, in the
busboy
game or
Walter
out of the
Bailey
game?
arrived at the cabaret room with news of the fire. To his utter dismay, supervisors were reluctant to interrupt the warm-up act on stage. They saw no smoke or flames, and when Walter Bailey told them of a fire at the front of the building, they probably imagined a tiny kitchen fire, something that the staff down that end of the building would surely deal with before it got out of hand. They saw no reason to evacuate a room full of excited and, more importantly, paying customers. Faced with this indifference, Walter Bailey, a junior employee just out of college, did something remarkable. His act of bravery is especially noteworthy when you consider that he suffered from intense stage fright. Walter Bailey marched to the front of the room, climbed up on stage, seized a microphone from a bemused performer, and informed everyone present that there was a fire and that they should evacuate at once. There may have been as many as 1,300 people in the cabaret room at that moment in time. If every single one had instantly and calmly heeded Walter Bailey's warning, they might, just possibly, have been able to evacuate in time. As it was, however, only a few hundred people started moving towards the exits. The rest remained. They saw no smoke or flames, they felt safe where they were. They had paid a lot of money for their tickets and did not wish for their evening to be disrupted. For a range of reasons, while a few hundred lucky souls evacuated, the majority of guests in the cabaret room remained in their seats. They remained there for just 4 minutes. At 9:10 p.m, the fire shorted out the power in the building, plunging every room and corridor into darkness. At almost the same moment, the smell of smoke and burning reached the cabaret room. Patrons panicked. Leaping to their feet, they pushed and shoved, stumbling in the dark, trampling others beneath their feet. The exits to the rooms quickly became a crush of bodies. The situation only worsened when flames raced through the building and blocked 2 of the 3 exits. Now, hundreds of desperate people were trying to escape through just one set of double doors. Reports from firefighters and survivors describe people stacked like cordwood in the doorway, with desperate patrons hurling themselves again and again at the opening, scrambling over bodies both dead and alive in order to escape. When the door became completely jammed with bodies, employees and rescuers found that no amount of pulling could free them from the crush. They were locked in, trapped. Worse still, some of the first people to escape from the cabaret room subsequently became lost in the twisting, turning corridors of the supper club. The multiple extensions that had been added to the building in the 1970s had turned it into a maze. Firefighters from every department in the county battled bravely against the flames, but in many parts of the building were simply forced to retreat by walls of smoke and incredibly high temperatures. At 11:30 p.m., certain that the roof was about to collapse, Fire Command ordered all firefighters to evacuate the building. This turned out to be a wise decision. At around midnight, the roof imploded, turning what remained of the building into a pile of burning wreckage that smouldered for 2 whole days. The fire resulted in 165 deaths, 162 of whom died on the scene, and 3 of whom died in hospital after being rescued. The vast majority of the dead were found in the cabaret room, where bodies were found piled in massive heaps at all of the available exits. Indeed, only 2 of the dead were found elsewhere in the building. As soon as the recovery operation was complete, an investigation was launched. It discovered a range of safety violations, including the absence of an alarm system, no firewalls, a profusion of flammable material in the building, no sprinklers, and no employee training. More than anything else, though, overcrowding was to blame for the disaster. Witnesses gave unsettling testimony about visits to the club in the months before the fire, complaining that the cabaret room was often so crowded with bodies that waitresses couldn't reach patrons in order to serve drinks. In these conditions, a high death count was inevitable. In the aftermath, the 3 top fire officials in Kentucky were suspended, accused of conducting improper fire safety investigations. A number of lawsuits were also launched by the families of victims. These were combined into a single class action lawsuit, which eventually resulted in a $10 million settlement from the General Electric Company, who had made the faulty wiring which caused the fire in the first instance. The site has remained undeveloped since the fire, although in 2020 it was acquired for the development of an entertainment complex. This new venue will include a memorial to the deceased from the fire, and, thanks to changes in laws and regulations over time, changes inspired by disasters such as this, will be much safer than the Beverly Hills Supper Club ever was.
What to watch next?
On the 27th of October, 2009, folk singer Taylor Mitchell was in the middle of a solo concert tour of the maritime provinces of Canada. During downtime between 2 concerts, she decided to go walking on the Cape Breton Highlands National Park Skyline Trail. This walk in the woods, however, ended up costing Taylor Mitchell her life. Among the last people to see Taylor alive were an American couple who passed her near the beginning of the Skyline Trail at 2:45 p.m. The couple were going in the opposite direction to Taylor, heading back down an access road towards the car park. While on this access road, they spotted a pair of coyotes walking towards them along the middle of the track, displaying an extraordinary lack of fear. The American couple moved aside and waited for the coyotes to pass. The animals did so, slinking off towards the Skyline Trail. Just 6 minutes later, the couple heard a disturbing sound. Animal cries mixed with human screams. These sounds were coming from the direction of the trail, the direction in which the coyotes had disappeared, the direction where Taylor had last been seen.
Jesus.
The couple returned quickly to the car park and used the phone there to call for help. As they were doing so, a new group of 4 hikers arrived at the car park. The couple informed them of what they had heard, and the 4 hikers set off up the access road towards the trail. The first things they found were Taylor's scattered possessions. Then they happened upon a trail of blood and torn clothing. Finally, they came to a washroom with a large pool of blood at the door. Taylor lay in a nearby clearing, with one coyote still standing over her, apparently unafraid. The group of 4 hikers charged the coyote several times before it relented and slunk away from Taylor.
It's very
Even
rare.
then, it remained close by until a member of the mounted police arrived and fired a shotgun in its direction, at which point it fled. Taylor was rushed to a local health centre and then airlifted to hospital. She'd lost an extraordinary amount of blood and was barely conscious. There were bites all over her body, including particularly serious wounds on her legs and head. Although she was alive and conscious when she was discovered, she did not survive her injuries. Thus it was that Taylor Mitchell became the victim of the only known fatal coyote attack on a human ever to have taken place in Canada.
It's just very
Taylor's
rare.
mother, who knew of her daughter's love for nature and wild things, issued a statement pleading for restraint. Taylor, she noted, would not have wanted any coyotes to be killed as a result of what happened to her. "We take a calculated risk," she said, "when spending time in nature's fold."
Coyotes don't
Despite
usually
this
attack
plea,
people.
several coyotes were killed by park officials during the next month, including one female that was acting aggressively. 3 of the 5 animals killed were connected to the attack on Taylor by traces of blood on their coats and other forensic evidence. It was noted that the coyotes killed were extremely aggressive. Since the death of Taylor Mitchell,
Yeah, I'm just pausing it to explain, because this is also like a I'm going to piss myself difficult thing that I'm doing in game. Coyote attacks on humans are incredibly rare. They don't particularly happen. Coyotes are scavengers. They're not hunters. They're not killers. They don't, chase after humans. They don't go after humans. You want to avoid large groups of them. Like, I saw a group of them when I lived in Arkansas and was, walking somewhere with my puppy, and I had to quickly sneak away. But, other than that, they're not... Yeah, they're just not. They're not really dangerous. They're not, gonna fuck with you. No, they really aren't. I mean, they'll give you a nasty bite, but in terms of, killing people, no. I mean, the danger level would be something around, say, a raccoon. You definitely don't want to get bit by one. You definitely don't want to get mobbed by a group of them. But in terms of just murdering humans randomly, they do not. Really, the only time we see that stuff is when they're rabid or starving. Because they are scavengers. They get their food by eating dead things. And when they live in populated areas by raiding trash, they're not hunters. A group of them can be particularly dangerous, but that's because a group of any, animal can be dangerous. A group of raccoons is gonna fuck you up too if you're not careful. A group of possums. But like 2 of them is a bit odd. It's very clear, though, judging from what the other hikers said, that these animals were scoping out the area. They were looking for prey. They were not afraid. Coyotes are usually, they're not skittish. They acclimate to human presence fairly quickly, but it's more that they don't like interacting with humans. They're chill to be around. They're not gonna, just fuck up your life 9 times out of 10. But again, they're a wild animal. So, if they can avoid you, they will. If they can't, they're not gonna be, freaking the fuck out, but they're also not gonna usually be your best friend. City coyotes are an entirely different beast. Coyotes really, really depend on the environment that they are in. But this is a national park. They're pretty in the wild. So what they were doing, looking at the other hikers and not, yielding or anything, they were unafraid. So that's very concerning. Yeah. That's kind of a situation where you want to not be alone, because they won't attack a group. Those 4 hikers were the best people to respond, because that's a bunch of people, not just 1 or 2. They obviously decided they didn't want to take on 2 humans, which is fairly typical. But 1 single solitary human that they can surprise and ambush, yeah, absolutely. But as far as, picking their prey goes, coyotes really do prefer easy prey. And humans are not easy prey, for fairly obvious reasons. So, I don't know the circumstances of why they attacked a human. Maybe they'll tell us, but it's rare.
Mitchell, attacks by coyotes on humans have been few and far between, but they do still occur. Reminders, each and every one, of the unpredictable nature of wild animals.
Yeah, it's just a good thing to remember that you do look like prey to some things. Most things are going to be a little freaked out by you, but if something is starving, a sole human does not look, that undelicious, for lack of a better word. They weigh risk versus reward.
At around 1:50 p.m. on the 27th of September 1986, more than 1 million helium-filled balloons were released from Public Square in Cleveland, Ohio, as a fundraising publicity stunt. While the launch itself was successful, the wind blew the mass of balloons in an unexpected direction, resulting in utter chaos. Millions of dollars of property damage, many injuries, and possibly even 2 deaths were the result. The stunt was coordinated by private company Balloon Art by Treb, but was backed by the city of Cleveland, who were keen for some good publicity. It was thought by many that the stunt would put Cleveland on the map. 6 months of planning went into the release. As the planned day of the event approached, a rectangular structure was assembled in the southwest quadrant of Public Square. This framework supported a net the size of a city block, designed to hold the filled balloons before the big moment of the release. Underneath this net, 2,500 students and other volunteers spent hour after hour filling balloons with helium. The target was 2 million balloons, but an approaching storm prompted an early launch, and the total topped out at 1.4 million. At 1:50 p.m. on the 27th of September, huge crowds gathered to watch the balloons be released. It was, indeed, a spectacular sight, and one that set a world record, just as the organisers had intended. For anyone watching in Cleveland that day, the launch had all the hallmarks of a great success. The problems began in the next few days. Most helium-filled balloons will remain aloft long enough to deflate entirely before falling to the ground. The Balloonfest balloons, however, ran swiftly into a band of rain and cool air, which caused them to drop prematurely. Millions of still inflated balloons descended on the countryside of Ohio. There, they clogged waterways and covered fields. They caused multiple traffic accidents as drivers attempted to avoid them. They spooked horses and were consumed by livestock, causing illness and injury. They drifted down onto the runways of Burke Lakefront Airport, which was forced to temporarily close. Worst of all, however, the balloons blanketed Lake Erie, where they interfered with the rescue effort for 2 fishermen who had gone missing. A rescue helicopter had difficulty reaching the area it was tasked with searching, and even when searches could be completed, spotting 2 bodies in the water amongst a star field of coloured balloons proved impossible. On September 29th, the Coast Guard suspended its search. The bodies of the fishermen later washed ashore. The wife of one of the deceased men sued the organisers of Balloonfest. So did many other people who had suffered traffic accidents or incidents involving livestock. The vast majority of cases were settled out of court, with costs outstripping all of the money that had been raised by the stunt. Balloonfest, disastrous as it was never repeated. The record it set stood for less than a decade before it was broken by Disney with a much more well-planned event in 1994. If Balloonfest 86 is remembered at all, it is remembered as an unmitigated disaster.
I'm making a road because the stuff around is called, well, you can see right there, it's soul sand, and it slows you the fuck down.
At around 11:25 a.m. on the 28th of April, 1995, a group of students from the Tai Poutini Polytechnic at Greymouth in New Zealand crowded onto a viewing platform high above Cave Creek in the Paparoa National Park on South Island. The viewing platform collapsed, sending the entire group tumbling into the chasm below. The vast majority did not survive the fall.
This is that awful engineering disaster I told you about a while ago.
Paparoa is a New Zealand national park, famous for its forest and unique rock formations. Cave Creek, one of its most popular sites, is a small stream which emerges from a cave system at the bottom of a 4-story deep chasm. The viewing platform, erected in 1994, enabled visitors to venture out over that chasm and look down at the emerging stream below.
I'm making a fort.
A large group of students from the outdoor recreation
looking for
course
something.
at the nearby Tai Poutini Polytechnic visited the park that day, but split into 2 groups early on. The first group, comprised of 17 students, along with a Department of Conservation officer as a guide, approached the platform and ventured out onto it. Survivors recall marvelling at how flimsy the platform felt. Despite this, they trusted that it had been constructed safely and evaluated by a qualified engineer.
Yeah, probably not something you should
They
be
were
marveling
wrong.
at.
The platform was a death trap. With all 18 people from the group on it, the platform collapsed, tumbling down into the chasm below. The victims fell 30 meters, almost 100 foot, before landing on jagged rocks. The second group, from whom the first had split off not long before, arrived at the location shortly after the collapse. A Department of Conservation officer from that group, along with 1 student, ran back along the trail to fetch help. Upon reaching their vehicles, however, they discovered that they did not have the keys. The student ran on foot to a nearby house to call the police. The first police officer took 2 hours to arrive at the site of the incident on foot. Helicopters and rescue equipment soon followed. 4 seriously injured students were extracted from the canyon. The remaining 14 people who had been standing on the platform when it collapsed had passed away. An inquiry into the disaster revealed that the platform had been improperly constructed and was bound to collapse at some point. Among the most egregious issues with it,
Let me actually do a screen snip real quick and I can show you, because they're showing the design of this thing. There you go, now you have a visual before we continue.
Upon reaching their vehicles, however, they discovered that they did not have the keys. The student ran on foot to a nearby house to call the police. The first police officer took 2 hours to arrive at the site of the incident on foot. Helicopters and rescue equipment soon followed. 4 seriously injured students were extracted from the canyon. The remaining 14 people who had been standing on the platform when it collapsed had passed away. An inquiry into the disaster revealed that the platform had been improperly constructed and was bound to collapse at some point. Among the most egregious issues with it was the fact that it had not been designed or approved by a qualified engineer. Furthermore, the platform was not bolted into the rock on which it was built. Instead, nails had been used to secure it. Additionally, the steps to the platform were not attached properly. The platform had never been granted building consent, nor listed or inspected, and warning signs suggesting a maximum of 5 people on the platform at any one time had been ordered, but never installed. The root cause of all these issues, the inquiry found, was a systemic issue with the Department of Conservation. The organisation had been given an immense and difficult task, but had not been given the funding to accomplish it, leading to the cutting of corners and improper construction work. Following this determination, the Department of Conservation inspected more than 520 structures across its parks, and 65 were closed for repairs. Many were removed, and safety notices were added to others. $2.6 million in compensation was paid to the families of the victims, but there were no prosecutions, as the Department of Conservation was a national entity, and law at the time did not permit the Crown to prosecute itself. New Zealand laws have since been changed to ensure that even government departments can be held to account. A memorial plaque was unveiled in 1996, and in 1998 the track, closed to visitors after the accident, reopened. New stairs were installed, but the viewing platform, that poorly made structure that claimed so many lives, was never rebuilt.
What's that? Mouse, you can do better than this. I can't see your messages on Discord. You gotta say them
At
here.
around 12:30 p.m. on the 15th of January,
Jeez,
1919, in the North End neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts, a huge storage tank filled with molasses burst. The sugary substance within flooded into nearby streets at great speed, destroying buildings, lifting cars and trucks on the crest of a wave, and smothering any unfortunate people in its path. In mere moments, the Boston molasses flood claimed 21 innocent lives. Molasses have many useful applications. Back in 1919, they were primarily fermented to produce ethanol, a key ingredient in both alcoholic drinks and munitions. It was the business of the Purity Distilling Company, based at 529 Commercial Street, to unload, store, and eventually process huge quantities of molasses delivered by incoming ships. The tank that caused the disaster was 15 meters, around 50 foot, tall, and 27 meters, around 90 foot, in diameter. Its size was sufficient to store more than 2 million gallons of molasses. When the collapse occurred, these 2 million gallons were unleashed all at once, forming a wave of molasses that spread rapidly in every direction, moving at speeds of up to 56 kilometers an hour, or 35 miles per hour, and reaching a height equivalent to a 2-story building. The wave, dense and fast-moving as it was, lifted a streetcar off an elevated track. It smashed some buildings flat and lifted others off their foundations. Many of the victims of the flood were killed in these first moments, but even when the wave had settled, the danger was not yet over. Molasses, denser than water, settled waist-deep in the street. Now exposed to the open air, it cooled rapidly, becoming thick and difficult to escape. One eyewitness gave the following report. Here and there struggled a form. Whether it was animal or human being was impossible to tell. Only an upheaval, a thrashing about in the sticky mass, showed where any life was. Horses died like so many flies on sticky flypaper. The more they struggled, the deeper in the mess they were ensnared. Human beings, men and women, suffered likewise.
Man,
A
just
frantic
imagine
rescue
chilling and
began,
dying in molasses.
with rescuers struggling to pull survivors from the sticky mess before they suffocated. It was slow and exhausting work, which went on for 4 days before a halt was finally called and the rescue operation became a clean-up. Some victims, having been completely glazed over with molasses or swept into the harbour by the flood, weren't identified for several months. Clean-up crews used salt water to wash away the molasses and sand to absorb it. Clean-up took weeks, even with the help of several hundred volunteers. The effort was hampered by the fact that many had entered the fringes of the flood and subsequently tracked sticky molasses wherever they went. Streetcars, telephones, benches, and subway platforms many blocks away from the disaster were sticky with molasses for weeks to come. One of the first class action lawsuits ever to be brought in the state of Massachusetts was launched by local residents. Initially, the Purity Distilling Company claimed that their tank had been blown up by anarchists and that they were not responsible for the flood. They later dropped this ludicrous claim when faced with the actual evidence and paid up to the tune of around $7,000 per victim, equivalent to $100,000 in today's money. The evidence that won this victory was soberingly conclusive. An inquiry after the disaster revealed that the tank was half as thick as it should have been, and partly constructed from brittle manganese. Basic safety tests were not carried out during the construction of the tank, and numerous warning signs were ignored during its lifetime. The tank, for example, groaned loudly when filled, and leaked so badly that local residents would often visit it in order to collect molasses for their homes. Rather than repairing these leaks, management ordered the tank to be painted brown to better hide them. The trigger for the incident was found to be thermal expansion. A new batch of warm, viscous molasses had been pumped into the tank the previous day, raising the temperature of the contents and causing it to expand. When combined with slightly warmer weather, the thermal expansion was sufficient to rupture the tank. The area where the tank once stood is now a baseball diamond in a public park. The area is used for recreation, but there is a small plaque in place to commemorate the victims of this bizarre disaster. Some report that the smell of molasses, even now, still lingers in the air in the north end of Boston. At around 6:29 p.m.
I'm trying to get over
on
here.
the 6th of March, 1987, the MS Herald of Free Enterprise, an 8-deck car and passenger ferry, capsized just moments after leaving the Belgian port of Zeebrugge. The incident resulted in the deaths of 193 passengers and crew. It was the most deadly sinking of a British ship in peacetime in more than 50 years. The Herald of Free Enterprise began active service in 1980, having been designed specifically for the popular ferry route between Dover and Calais. This ship, and the others in its class, were designed to facilitate quick loading and unloading, and to have rapid acceleration.
I don't
On
know
the
what
day
you're
of the
saying,
incident,
yeah, too.
the Herald of Free Enterprise was not on her normal route. Instead, she was ferrying between Dover in England and Zeebrugge in Belgium. This caused some problems when loading and unloading passengers and cars. Specifically, the ramp at Zeebrugge could not be raised high enough to reach Deck E, the upper vehicle deck. To address this issue, water was pumped into the bow ballast tanks on board the Herald, thus lowering the whole vessel in the water until E-deck was low enough for boarding to commence. Once all the cars and passengers had been loaded, however, the ballast tanks were not emptied, and the ship remained low in the water. This was further exacerbated by something known as the squat effect. When a vessel is in motion, the movement of water beneath the hull creates an area of low pressure and causes the boat to sink slightly lower in the water. This effect is strongest in shallow water or when a boat is moving rapidly. Both of these conditions were true for the Herald of Free Enterprise that day. The Zeebrugge harbour was shallow, and the boat pulled rapidly away from port in an effort to compensate for a slightly late departure. The result of these combined factors was that water at the bow of the ship was able to reach all the way up to G-deck. Normally this would not be an issue, as the doors there would be sealed. However, on this day, the bow doors on G-deck were, for some reason, wide open. Water cascaded in, flooding the deck and leaking down to the other decks below. The car decks on the Herald were large, uninterrupted spaces, not subdivided by watertight bulkheads. This allowed the water to slosh around freely, throwing off the balance of the ferry and causing it to capsize. The incident unfolded with astonishing rapidity. The ship left Zeebrugge harbour at 6:24 p.m. with a crew of 80 and 459 passengers. She began to capsize less than 4 minutes later. After listing to port almost 30 degrees, she briefly righted herself before listing to port again and capsizing onto her side. The whole event took no more than a minute and a half. During that minute and a half, contact between water and electrical systems plunged the ship into darkness. Floors became walls, walls became floors, passenger decks were inundated with water. Many people drowned in those first chaotic minutes, while others died from injuries sustained during falls or when crushed by falling objects. It was a stroke of good fortune that the ship capsized onto a sandbar. Were this not the case, it would have undoubtedly sunk completely into deeper water. As it was, the ship came to rest on its side, partly submerged, with hundreds of souls trapped inside. Here is an account of the incident from survivor Simon Osborne. I was standing at a duty-free counter when I felt a sudden, violent jolt. A woman behind me in the queue started screaming, and I thought she was overreacting. But seconds later, another, more violent jolt shook the vessel, and then, almost instantaneously, the ship capsized. It happened so very, very quickly. I fell onto my back and slid along the polished wooden decks of the ship's lounge until I landed on the front of the bar, which had gone from being vertical to horizontal. In the brief moments before the lights went out, I had a clear view of the horror around me. Everything that wasn't bolted to the decks came crashing down. I recall fruit machines, chairs, tables and waste bins tumbling through the air as the vessel suddenly flipped over. Much worse was the sight of people somersaulting from one side of the ship to the other. One man cried out as he crashed through a glass panel just feet from where I stood, rooted to the spot, wide-eyed, frozen in fear. A split second later, we were plunged into darkness as the lights failed, and I was instantly swept up by the swirling wave of freezing water which had crashed through the ship's doors and windows. I thought I was going to die. Passengers, like Simon, who survived the initial capsize of the ship, were then stuck within the overturned hull, often submerged in freezing cold water. They had no choice but to wait for rescue, something that, for many, was too late in coming. An immediate inquiry was launched into the incident. It found that many different factors contributed to the sinking, but that none were more prominent than the fact that the bow doors were open when the ship left port. Who was to blame for this terrible lapse? It was the job of the assistant boatswain, a man named Mark Stanley, to close the doors, and the job of the first officer, a man named Leslie Sable, to make sure that they were shut before departure. When the ferry left on its fateful voyage, however, Stanley was asleep in his cabin.
What? Just fucking... I told you I'm streaming. I told you. I cannot answer questions. And also, I don't have the fucking answer to that anyways. Jeez. I'm not actually, like, genuinely annoyed at this person. I'm just, like, kind of in the middle of something, and answering a complex question is not something my brain is able to do right now. So, shut up. 5 seconds. Not you. I'm not talking to you, Dragon. Erg. This is my downtime. This is my fucking downtime. We have my downtime. Yeah, no, you're all good. It's just GM stuff, and I'm kind of like, I can't actually answer your questions. I'm in the middle of something. I'm not
On
mad,
the
I'm
10th
just, like,
of April,
tired.
1991, the Moby Prince, an Italian passenger ferry, collided with another ship, resulting in an oil fire on the deck of the Moby Prince. The crew promptly radioed for help and herded passengers to a fireproofed room within the ship. The Moby Prince was mere minutes from a Port Authority base, and the fire was spreading relatively slowly. It seemed all but certain that they would be rescued in plenty of time. And yet, as the minutes ticked by, help never came. The fire on board the Moby Prince would turn out to be one of the worst maritime disasters in Italian history, in part because of a few tiny human errors and one tragic miscommunication. The Moby Prince was built in 1967 in an English shipyard near Liverpool, and was originally operated by a Dutch company, sailing the route between Harwich and Hook of Holland. In 1984, the vessel was sold to Navama, an Italian shipping company that operated numerous routes between the mainlands and islands of France and Italy. On the day of the disaster, the Moby Prince was sailing a route between Livorno, a destination popularly known by English speakers.
I reckon it's just like you having to deal with staff stuff when you're in the middle of something. It's like, yes, this definitely needs to get done. It's just, stop tagging me while I said I am explicitly not available. I will be back soon. It's fine. It was a fair question that needed my answer. It was just me being a grouchy Gus. Because the Nether is being very frustrating. The Nether is a very dangerous zone to be in. As I'm sure you're learning, like, firsthand. There's fucking lava everywhere, there's fire, there's just the danger zone. And you know, you kind of want, like, all your focus in this very scary area. Way too much lava. Way too much lava. I added a new mod so I don't have to, like, take forever to cut down trees. It's very pretty. I like it. Oh. I'm in a lava place because I need to be in a lava place. And I complain about your hot weather because your hot weather is stupid. I need to find a certain kind of tree, and also your hot weather is not the same. Okay, mouse, I'm not sure why you think that this has to be that complicated. Stop jumping. Stop doing that. Does not have to be like that. That does it. We're listening to Minecraft music. It's my house, get away.
I hear him outside the door, I won't let them in. Cause I've done this before, they are not my friends. I got a chest full of gold ingots and diamonds. I'm getting tired of the mobs trying to find a way in. Sometimes you gotta stay in. Zombies go about it. Spiders trying to get in. Sometimes you gotta stay in. Get away from my house. Trying to take control now. Creepers will explode now. Why don't you just go around? Get away from my house. Got my iron sword now. Sun's about to go down. I can't even go around. Get away from my house. Get away from my house. Morning comes and I think that it's safe outside. But I see a freaking skeleton trying to hide. Close the door real fast before it's too late. Let the sun burn them up and I'll celebrate. Sometimes you gotta stay in. Zombies go about it. Spiders trying to get in. Sometimes you gotta stay in. Get away from my house. Trying to take control now. Creepers will explode now. Why don't you just go around? Get away from my house. Got my iron sword now. Sun's about to go down. I can't even go around. Get away from my house. Get away from my house. Got a lot of zombies out there wanna get in my pad. If they try to break into my house, then I'm gonna get mad. Spiders all around trying to climb in the bag. And there's a bunch of creepers coming, I see through the glass. Bow and arrow, shoot 'em up, iron sword slash. Mikasa's overrun, so I better think fast. They coming in the side, I'm ready for combat. It's my house, time to take out the trash. Get away from my house, trying to take control now. Creepers will explode now. Why don't you just go around? Get away from my house, got my iron sword out. Sun's about to go down, I can't even go around. Get away from my house.
I'm about to scare the piss out of you, by the way. Just so you're prepared.
Get away from my house.
There it is.
pretending it's not really you. No, I don't wanna believe that it's all true. But here I'm so terrified, all the way through. So across my world and I know
You're about to see, and you're possibly about to cry.
but you're always gonna give me one more fry. And yeah, I've been down a million times, but I know you're gonna give me one more fry. Try to run away, but somehow I keep on seeing you around. If it's not a hole in the wall, you put a redstone torch down. Every day I find myself always checking behind my back. Love her everywhere, yeah, I wish I could say it was a hack, yeah. But oh man, here we go again, doing what you do, yeah. I stop pretending it's not really you. No, I don't wanna believe that it's all true, yeah. But here I'm so terrified, all the way through.
Told you.
So across my world and I know tonight that you're always gonna give me one more fry. And yeah, I've been down a million times, but I know you're gonna give me one more fry. Yeah, gonna give me one more fry. Yeah, gonna give me one more fry. Yeah, gonna give me one more fry. But oh man, here we go again, do what you do. Yeah, I stop pretending it's not really you. No, I don't wanna believe that's all true. Yeah, 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 yeah.
I'm crouching so hard right now. Like, my pinky fucking really hurts. I know, like, I could have just made it over there, but I'd have to go through all that lava, so we're doing it this way. God, this is so bright. This is hurting my eyeballs. But we found a thing. Not sure what the thing is, but we found it.
I'm waking up to TNT. I eat my pork and I craft my sword. I'm covered in these spider webs. They're breaking in, surprise attack. So I jump on my horse's back. This is it, the apocalypse.
No, we want... I'm scrolling backwards, not forwards, mouse wheel. I'm seriously so fucking annoyed with this mouse. Another pyramid, huh? Huh. Okay.
It's an uprising, I suppose. We're painted gray to fit right in. Whoa. They're breaking in, surprise attack.
not the place to lag. Wow.
This is it, the apocalypse. Whoa, I'm waking up. I'll be optimistic enough to make an earthquake. Welcome to a new day, to a new day. Welcome to a new day with an update. Whoa, whoa, oh, we couldn't get worse. Imagine dragons and their dragons. Whoa, whoa, oh, we couldn't get worse. Imagine dragons and their dragons. All golems go, zombies will hide deep in my bones. Infected inside. Waking up.
Wow.
Enough to make an earth.
Good to know.
Welcome to a new day, to a new day. Welcome to a new day with an update. Whoa, whoa, oh, we couldn't get worse. Imagine dragons and their dragons. Whoa, whoa, oh, we couldn't get worse. Imagine dragons and their dragons.
Well, that was a lot of lost loot, but
It's a new day, gotta stay alive. Just answer, is it your will to survive? Playing hardcore all alone. I gotta get to the end on my own. Grabbing my pick, got some things to find. I know I have to explore, it's a grind. Building a house, a new home.
okay, I know we can get what we need.
Into the unknown. If you can craft, you can mine. Or use a sword, you decide. Just do your best in this fight. There is only one way through the night. If you can craft, you can mine. Or use a sword, you decide.
There it is, perfect.
Just do your best in this fight. There is only one way through the night. Here in this hell, I've been once before. Get in that place right, I need just one more. Make no mistake, not this time. Victory soon will be mine.
Got what I need, got all my supplies. I got to conquer the end, that's my prize. See if it's a full one.
I don't know. Is
Yes.
she a friend or a foe? If you can craft, you can mine. Or use a sword, you decide. Just do your best in this fight.
Come on.
There is only one way through the night. If you can craft, you can mine. Or use a sword, you decide. Just do your best in this fight.
Holy shit.
Through the night. This is the goal we've been working for. Defeat the Ender Dragon.
We
win the
are
war. There's no way
nowhere
back
home base.
down below.
Like, nowhere.
Into the void we will go. Desolate place, now we're all alone. We have to fight to the death, can't go home. No option to run away. Give it our best, win the day. If you can craft, you can mine. Or use a sword, you decide.
Oh, good to know that leads fucking somewhere, though.
This fight, there is only one way through the night.
The thing about the Nether is that it's very compact compared to what's called the overworld, where we usually are. So, like, if I go, say, 100 blocks in the Nether, it can be 4 or 5 times that much in the overworld.
If you can craft, you can mine.
Okay.
Or use a sword, you decide.
Yeah, actually, we'll go to the other side of the
Just do
temple.
your best in this fight. There is only one way through the night.
Like, remember, we start over here, and we're over here now, and, like, that is actually surprisingly a major distance over worlds.
If you can craft, you can mine, or use a sword you decide. Just do your best in this fight. There is only one way through the night.
So where we popped out was like nowhere near anything, because that's just how it works. It's not going to be.
My name's Dan and I'm a pig man. Let me show you around another
pig man.
My name's Dan and I'm a pig man. Hanging with my pig man gang. And we'll be found on the ground, deep down in the nether. Leather region covered by a brown bit of leather. With a wimble and a wobble through the purple portal. You're living in a world that'll hurt all mortals. Stay alert or go hurt on the fall in the gorge. And the gorge, the result will be awful. Caution, you better be warned to be cautious. Never snort leather water in another fortress. Hug your thought to a protein of torches. This is the sort of resort to be dauntless. Endure and it will take up all your resources. You get enough on the floor, feeling nauseous. And you fall for us? Of course, this is torture. No, such your lordship, I'm going to all kiss. Let up on my board if you calling us porkers. We're the pig man and we're all freaking gorgeous.
Pig man, my name's Dan and I'm a pig man.
The other pig man claim I'm a clever cock. So let me tell you all about the other leather marks. In another one, wonder what you've ever seen with a skeleton, with a skeleton. If you've ever been a gas at the gas at the blast with a gas at you blast, it can shot to a glass to attack. And when a thing disappears, it can act. Till bring you to tears, like a sad book, it's a tragic news about a man hung from a magma cube. I assume now this ain't gonna happen again, like a baby pig sat on the back of a hen. Being warned of the lost for taste no flavor on, or you'll end up more lost to the stray dog in trouble of a bubbles like a hot tub of radar. Sure, just another name jotted in a case log. Longer than the list of the mobs in this place, there's plenty more. Brought friends to play with. Have you fought 20 blazes? Avoided enderman gazes, attempt to make sense of the empty pages of the map won't show how immense this cave is. Like Big Ben, it's surrounded by pig men. All political, can you tell what I did there? My name's Dan and I'm a pig man. Let me show you around another pig man. My name's Dan and I'm a pig man. Hanging with my pig man, yeah, with a pig man. Living in the with a pig man. I consider my friends, you want a pig man. I consider the best, you want a pig man. Live in a big pig man. Big man, big man, big man, make it big man. Big man, big man.
If you want to end up like way out in the middle of fucking fucking nowhere in like interesting places, then the nether's the way to do that. But as you can see, it's a very dangerous place to port into.
You get online and the world
It's safer to leave than it is to enter.
haven't played since point two. You break a smile cause you've almost forgot how to mine. It's just been such a long time, and every time you're denied with all the crafting recipes you tried. I'm sure it's ingots with some leather hides. But now the wiki page is loading slow. It could be wood or mossy cobblestone. What was the recipe? I just don't know. I'm all alone, asking, how do I craft this again? How do I craft this again? How do I craft this again? I'm all alone. How do I craft this again? Trying to guess how to make an anvil. So one in town and I've got a bag full of different ores I collected down in the mine. Am I just wasting my time? Then to my uttermost surprise,